Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to ArcBlock DevCon 2020 and to the next session here. My name is Matt McKinney. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the VP of Marketing here at ArcBlock, and I'm really happy to be leading this session and have the opportunity to tell you about one of our new products and latest services running on top of ABT Node called DID Connect. Really quickly here, before we actually jump into this session, this is a quick introduction as to what this session is all about. Throughout the conference, you're going to hear a lot about decentralized identity. You're going to hear a lot about DID or DIDs and how to go ahead and use these in terms of your applications, developer tools. Our focus here for this session is to really look at an introduction of DID Connect and looking at how we can create trusted experiences using decentralized identity or DID Connect. It's everything, basically giving you everything you need to build what we call identity apps. And these identity apps allow you to create trusted data sharing or connectivity between your users and services, or allow for peer-to-peer exchanges in terms of whatever type of application and service you're wanting to run. Again, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Matt McKinney, and I work for a company called ArcBlock, based out of Bellevue, Washington. And ArcBlock is really a team of what I'll say industry experts, developers, technologists, thought leaders, who are really focused on creating successful outcomes by enabling teams and businesses to use blockchain-ready services easily. So before we get started here, I also want to go ahead and give a shout out to the Identity Woman, also known as Kalia Young, for her previous presentation here in the session before me, and really helping everyone have a better understanding of the current state of decentralized identity and many potential use cases and benefits that decentralized identity can actually have. I feel very fortunate to kind of have heard her story, the history behind decentralized identity, kind of how the transition has happened from really starting back in 2005 to today, and some of the potential challenges we have, opportunities we have, and really looking at what's next. How can we actually benefit from decentralized identity? What are the use cases where decentralized identity can be applied? And really with so much potential, how can we actually start using it within our own applications and services? Throughout the previous session and some of the other sessions actually during the conference here, you are going to hear that with blockchain and decentralized identity, roadblocks do remain. And really, the reason for that, one of the questions we want to ask here is why hasn't adoption really taken off already? We know that decentralized identity is here, has all sorts of potential to do all sorts of really interesting things. But so far, it's really not ready for prime time. And by no means is this list a complete list. But these are items that come up in conversations that we have with customers, potential users, and want to go ahead and kind of look at these as potential roadblocks and kind of seeing how DID Connect came to be. So when you look at the roadblocks, one of the examples, of course, you hear about is different blockchains, different standards. So when you look at like Ethereum or you look at Bitcoin, you look at Hyperledger, ArcBlock, we don't necessarily all work well together at this point. We're doing some things differently, and the systems, Bitcoin doesn't necessarily talk to Ethereum. And if it does, it requires a lot of code or requires somebody to come and build something that creates potentially extra steps or extra process in terms of what we're trying to do. The other part is also different standards. So today with decentralized identity, and again, as you heard in the previous session, really the leading authority behind the standard for decentralized identity is the W3C, or even going further, the W3CCG, which is the working group leading efforts behind decentralized identity, of which ArcBlock is a member. But even with these standards, by no means are all the organizations or all the companies working in the space following this W3C standard. So with decentralized identity, it can also be expensive. So if you're looking to adopt decentralized identity into your tech stack, it may require a rebuild, may require you to change your application and service, which doesn't necessarily always add the benefits that you want in terms of cost versus benefit, and it can actually have increased costs. So if you look at something like Ethereum and you're wanting to build decentralized identity using Ethereum, there's a potential for additional gas tax fees on there. So decentralized identity, again, it has some challenges. And one of the other ones that we see quite frequently in the conversations that we're having is it doesn't work well with legacy systems and data sources. One of the conversations we frequently have with our customers is, how do I actually move my existing user database over into this new environment or over into this new technology? And that's a question. If you want to know the answer to that, of course, you can give us a call. But we'll talk a little bit about it through this session today. With decentralized identity, some of the basic functionality that we've all come to expect doesn't necessarily exist or can be challenging. The example we often talk about will be if a user comes to your website and they log in a lot of the identity systems, that user does not remain logged in. So we're all used to like Google sign on, Facebook sign on, Twitter sign on, Microsoft sign on, where once we log in, we'll stay logged in until we clear our cookies or cache. But with decentralized identity, it actually requires an extra step. You have to make sure you have an identity service under the hood to make sure that that connection remains persistent. With decentralized identity, it doesn't always work with single sign-on solutions. So something like OAuth, SAML, or even OpenID, they aren't necessarily, they're not necessarily working well together at this point. And that can be a challenge for many companies who've already adopted SSO into their stack. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we all have as an industry, just overall, and I think during the conference, you'll hear from different sessions that user experience is still a challenge. How do you enable people to use the service and really like it, enjoy it, be able to have a similar experience to what they're actually doing today? So far, that it's below average. It isn't the same, and it needs a lot of work. And then lastly, one of the things I again comes up in conversations that we're having is with decentralized identity. How do I get access to larger ecosystems? So if I, again, look at something like Google Sign-On, or if I'm looking at something like Active Directory, it has the ability to tap into these larger ecosystems in a very easy, user-friendly way. So these are things that we want to consider. I mean, if you're looking at decentralized identity, there are some challenges, but these challenges can actually be overcome. And that's one of the reasons we're here to talk about DID Connect. So DID Connect was actually built specifically to address some of these concerns for our developers, for our organizations, for businesses that are using ArcBlock to build their applications and services. So DID Connect gives everyone a way to build next generation trusted experiences using decentralized identity. So how does it actually do that? Great question. DID Connect, number one, it's easy to create, deploy, and manage what we call identity apps using just a simple web-based GUI. There is no command line. There is no terminal. It's something where I can simply log into a website and actually create the components and get the code that I need to put it on my website. With DID Connect, it does have built-in support for interoperability between your systems and networks. So with that built-in support, if you are creating multiple applications or you have multiple services running, as you create those, everything is already interoperable by default. So anything that you're creating on ArcBlock will all work with any other service you create on ArcBlock. So DID Connect also allows you to create new user experiences and be able to do it without the need for PII. Again, all of the identity components, the services, the ability to generate a DID is already built into DID Connect. So it doesn't require a lot of extra steps. And we'll actually show it to you here in just a few minutes. And then also with DID Connect, it really allows you to expand and integrate with your existing identity systems like OAuth. So with DID Connect, we have a deep integration with something like OAuth, where you can basically use the same service you're already using today, but now attach it to decentralized identity to add an additional layer of security, of privacy, but also, again, allow your users to control their data. So DID Connect, one of the unique things about ABT Node overall is that it's very modularized. You have the ability to use different technologies, different services for the different blocklets available in the ABT Node. And DID Connect is no different. So with DID Connect, by default, in the example we'll go through today, we're going to go ahead and use MongoDB. But of course, you can use a blockchain. So when you deploy an ArcBlock blockchain, you can actually connect it to the DID Connect service. Or you can actually connect to other data sources like Amazon's QLDB or Microsoft Azure. Again, as long as you're able to put data into it, you can connect it to the DID Connect service, and really you can design it to work around your specific business requirements. And so lastly, with DID Connect, again, using the ABT node, it's designed to be highly scalable, transparent, and secure. So many of today's identity systems, one of the challenges that you have with blockchain in general is a scalability challenge. Is how do you adopt a technology that may or may not have the capacity to handle the volume of transactions or the volume of users that you're bringing to your application or service? So with DID Connect, it's really designed to have horizontal scale and vertical scale in terms of being able to support your service. So with DID Connect, one of the things I also would suggest that we look at, before we actually dive into the example, and as we look at this, is what are really the use cases for DID Connect? So I have this I have this web-based runtime called ABT Node. I have a Blocklet that allows me to run an identity service. So what can I actually do with it? And it's a great question and something we talk about frequently with our users and customers. So DID Connect, it isn't just an identity service. It really is a way to allow you to create new experiences for your users, new experiences for your business, and really rethink about how you're handling security, how you're handling e-commerce, and kind of imagine new scenarios and new situations that will greatly benefit your customers. So one of the things we do frequently talk about with our customers is that identity is really just the gateway to blockchain. It's something that you have to have in order to, if you expect to have any kind of users or devices, you need that identity component to work within the network or to work within the system to be able to handle the users, the IoT devices, whatever it may be. However, with decentralized identity, it's not the only part, right? There's other things that you can add to it to create these really interesting user experiences. So DID Connect, obviously you're able to support, user ownership. So today's day and age, of course, there's a lot of conversations around, privacy, keeping my data secure, especially around like COVID-19, for example, and contact tracing. How do I share my information in a way that's trusted, secure, but keeps my personal information to myself? I don't necessarily have to give away information that I don't necessarily want to share. So again, with that, you can also look at something like education and data records, and I'll show you another example of that here just a minute. Of course, e-commerce, healthcare, IoT, and one of the things that I think probably the most popular in terms of decentralized identity today, of course, is login and authentication, identity management. You have that ability to, again, to allow people to log in a secure and private way, allow them to control their information, but also allow your business or your application to get the information that they need in terms of being able to verify a user coming through the system. And that would be using something, for example, like verifiable credentials. So again, you can authenticate and verify a person is who they say they are. And there's different ways to do that depending on what the requirement is. We often talk about, as an example, what about verifying an email? Like, I want to verify that this email is in fact real. And a user can actually go through a process, what we call KYC, or know your customer, and they'll go through a process of verifying their name and their email address. And then once confirmed, we can actually send them some type of certificate or some type of asset that they can attach to their identity. And the next time they come to the website, they'll actually use that to log in rather than using personal information to do that. So it's a really interesting way for people to experience an application or service. And then, of course, data storage. So there's lots of different opportunities. I think the use cases, it's really just kind of left to your imagination. You have all sorts of ways that you can reimagine how users are going to come. We talk frequently about loyalty points, reward systems, collectibles. All of these things use decentralized identity to actually work as we do that. So in terms of using DID Connect, I think it's important for everyone to know here, we're not just talking about it. This is actually something that ArcBlock as an organization, we've been living it. Today, we're actually using DID Connect ourselves. And if you've come to this event, you've actually used DID Connect in terms of how you bought your ticket, how you've used your wallet, how you've generated your login. So it is something that we essentially are dog fooding our own technology as well. Some of the examples you would find in that, of course, if anybody's had the opportunity to go to the website and go ahead and obtain one of the badges that we've offered. So far to date, there's been a few different badges available in terms of your tickets, countdown badges. There's other ones coming, of course, for all the sessions that we're holding. Each one of these, of course, is unique. It's attached to a blockchain. More importantly, it's actually attached to a specific user. That user can store it, they control it, they can save it, they can transfer it, they can actually do whatever they want with it. But the great part is that it creates this really interesting experience in terms of how the user comes to your service and begins to interact with it using this decentralized identity. Kind of another example of that is if you look at this, these are all different badges that have been generated so far in terms of the conference that we're actually looking at here. And each one, again, is unique. Again, it's on the blockchain. It's something that the user is completely in control of. So one of the examples I mentioned earlier was education. So there's been a big push over the last year in terms of moving education records, diplomas, these types of activities, training, certificates, put all of these on the blockchain. Putting them on the blockchain is one part of it. The second part, of course, is you have to have the identity component in order for a user to obtain the record, also for the issuer to be able to issue the certificate, and also for somebody to actually verify that, right? So decentralized identity allows this entire interaction to actually work. So when you look at that, you basically have 5 steps that they go through. And then in the end, the end user will actually be able to obtain the certificate, store it in their wallet, and they own it. They can share it and do whatever they want with it in terms of that. And I also mentioned here, COVID-19. Of course, this has been a huge topic for a lot of different organizations, a lot of different employees, people in general, of course, myself. So ArcBlock is actually part of this initiative called COVID Creds, basically COVID-19 Credentials Initiative. And this is something that is leveraging decentralized identity in a huge way to really allow people, again, to preserve the privacy of their information, but also be able to interact with others in a way it's secure, but also allows the other people to get information that they actually need to evaluate kind of whatever the circumstance is. So if I have COVID-19, I can actually share that information, but people don't necessarily know my personal information. There's no negative consequences to that. And I think it's really important. So as we look at DID Connect, the next question, of course, would be well, how does it actually work, right? So, we've gone through some of the challenges that we've had so far. We've looked at the use cases. We've talked about some of the examples that ArcBlock is actually using for the conference using DID Connect. Again, we've looked at tickets, badges, certificates, education records. So how does this actually all work? So when you look at DID Connect, it's really important that under the hood, there's actually a lot of things going on. But on the front end, it's a very simple, easy application that you can use to basically leverage this technology for your own application or your own service. So fundamentally, DID Connect is based on ArcBlock's W3C compliant, what we call ABT DID protocol. So this is a protocol that currently is with the W3C CCG, and you can see a graphic here on the right side. This is a standard, basically our protocol to generate the identities on our network. So there's a lot of detail. If you want to go and look at the specification, I would encourage you to go in. It tells you how we generate the DIDs, what are the methods we use, the process that actually happens behind the scenes. And of course, this is, there's other organizations like Bitcoin, Ethereum, Archain, and a lot of different kind of the leading organizations within the decentralized identity space that are all following this same standard. And today, this really is the de facto standard as of now. The great part is that this protocol is something that's actually built in. All of the hard stuff, all of the code and the bits that actually make this stuff work is already built into DID Connect. It doesn't require you to do anything extra. It's something that effectively anybody can run it, even the marketing guy, if you will. So no additional expertise is required. And with DID Connect, it does have built-in support for ABT Wallet. So it's a really important component of that there's no additional configuration required for the end user. Again, because with identity and decentralized identity in general, it does require a fair amount of what we'll call user tasks, right? If a user wants to access a website or a user wants to obtain a certificate, they're going to have to do certain actions or certain activities. And the ABT wallet really is the standard as far as decentralized identity wallets and having the best user experience for users to come and interact with decentralized identity-based services. So with DID Connect, because it's based on the ABT node, you also have the ability to deploy it anywhere with ready-made ABT node images on our partner sites. So one of the great things with DID Connect, again, is you can build your own identity service and you can build your own identity network across data centers, across clouds, across geographies. It's really up to you. ABT node provides a very flexible cloud-native environment. You can run it, again, in AWS. You can run it in Azure. You could run it on a Raspberry Pi if you want to. But it allows you to really build an identity network in, again, the way that makes sense for your business. You may only need one node, or you may need to build your own network in terms of validating and having some additional security there. So you have that ability to do that. And with ABT Node and again, with DID Connect, it does have an extensible design and it is very developer friendly. So developers can always go in and make modifications to the service or to the blocklet and basically create your own version of the DID Connect service as we do that. So as we look at DID Connect, I think one of the other most exciting parts of this whole thing for me is the fact that, what do I need to get started for this? And if you look at this list, one thing you won't see is a lot of complexity, right? It's really looking at just 3 simple things to start. Number one, of course, is you do need ABT Node. And ABT Node is kind of the foundational piece for all of the entire ArcBlock platform to be able to build services, run your applications, and manage those across the different ecosystems that you're using. Secondly, is you do need to go and install the DID Connect Blocklet. So if you've ever had the experience of installing an app on your iPhone or your Android, this is basically how it works, right? You log into the ABT node, you go to the marketplace, and you can actually install the Blocklet just like you would an app on your phone. It's that easy. And then, of course, the last part is you do need to have ABT Wallet. So as you access the services, and I had mentioned this before, that we also use all the same services for ArcBlock. You do need the ABT Wallet in terms of accessing and setting up the service. So I'm going to use my decentralized identity to set up the ABT node, to set up the Blocklets, and actually interact with the different systems that I'm trying to use in terms of building this. So really quickly here, before I actually show you how to do it, I'm just going to quickly kind of go through the instructions of setting up DID Connect. So of course, step number one I had mentioned before is install ABT node. So today, as of today, there's really two ways to set up ABT node. First and foremost, of course, you can go to something like AWS, just go to the marketplace and run a search for ABT node. And there'll be a few instructions in terms of how to put it into your AWS environment, or if you need to set up AWS, it'll walk you through the steps to do that. Secondly, if you want to go ahead and deploy it locally onto your laptop, there is one prerequisite that you need to go ahead and have Node.js installed on your device or on your laptop. And then, of course, again, you need to have ABT Wallet available to yourself as well. And then there's three simple commands that you would actually run to get it to run on your laptop. And we'll go through that in just a minute here. And then secondly, of course, when you log in, this is what you'll see is the ABT Node Dashboard. Note here on the side here, you have an action bar. And within that action bar, the two parts we're going to pay attention to for this session specifically is the marketplace and Blocklets as we go through this process. So the second step in this, as we go into the ABT node and go into the marketplace, we're going to go ahead and install the DID Connect Blocklet. So again, with DID Connect, there is one prerequisite. So of course, if you're a developer, any kind of app builder, this is going to be something that's very easy to do. The only requirement is you do need to have some type of data service in the back end. I had mentioned earlier on in the presentation here that it does work with different data sources, different blockchains. So in this case, for this example, we're just going to use something like MongoDB to go ahead and run the service. Because again, as I generate users and I'm generating data on the DID Connect service, I need somewhere for that data to go. And then there's a few additional steps as you go through this in terms of that second step in getting DID Connect up and running. And then, of course, the third step we had mentioned before is identity app. So you need to create your identity app. So it's really important, I think, as you go through this step, to think about identity apps as components. So as you build an identity app, the example I would say is I want to build an identity app for login. I want to build an identity app for payment. I want to build an identity app for some other purpose. So as you create these identity apps, they typically will serve a specific function that you're trying to address. The majority of the time, and I think most users right now, the most common use case you're going to see is login and authentication. So this process here just kind of quickly shows you, steps to go ahead and create your first identity app. And again, we'll show you this live so you can actually see it as well as we go through the process. And then lastly, in terms of using DID Connect. So after the slide, we're going to go into the live demo, but I think it's important as you install DID Connect, you create an identity app. There's additional examples then to help you get started. You can go into under integration and learn how to install it on, set up this new identity app in terms of your React app, Express.js, Android, WordPress. There's also different ways that you can actually begin to integrate these components. And I think it's really important to understand that, again, one of the things we're trying to address here is to make it very easy to use, very easy to deploy, and very easy to integrate into your existing applications and services. It isn't something where you have to replace your entire ecosystem. Instead, what you can do is adopt it into WordPress. You can adopt it into your existing Android app. It's very easy to do. One other thing I would just note out here too is if you are using something like OAuth, again, the integration is already there. You just follow a couple extra steps and you can basically run your own OAuth service with decentralized identity. So as we do this, let's go ahead and now take a look at the process of actually setting up the service itself. All right, so give me just a second here. So now, as you can see, we are at the terminal. So I had mentioned before that the first step, there's 3 commands as we do this. And again, I'm not going to go into too much depth in terms of how we actually install this. But if you take a look here, it's a pretty simple command. Again, even even the marketing guy can actually put this in here and get this up and running in terms of the console. And for the purposes of this example, we want to show it this way because we want to show you kind of the steps that are required to go through this. Going through something like AWS or Azure, I think will be a much simpler process. But in this way, you can actually see kind of the beginning to end of how we actually create a ABT node, but then also set up the DID Connect Blocklet. All right. And as you can see here, we've just installed the ABT node, and now we have, normally when you go through the ABT node setup, there's an additional step called ABT init. So as you go through that process, you can configure the name, some configuration on details around your ABT node. But in this process, we're going to go ahead and skip that. And in this case, let's go ahead and actually get our ABT node started. So ABT node start, and go ahead and enter. And what we're looking for here then is it's going to go ahead and generate a URL for us to put in our browser when it's ready. All right, and as you can see there, we've got that URL that we can go ahead and now put into the browser window. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and switch my screens here for you. So we've got a browser window open here. And so you can see we're going to go ahead and put that in. And of course, this is the first time now in terms of interacting with the ABT wallet. This is the first time we're going to go ahead and be required to enter it in here. And so on the screen here, of course, you can see I'm going to put in my password. And just about there. All right, and you can see here I've got my profile. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is scan the QR code at this point. And you can scan, and the login process is pretty fast. And again, the one thing it's going to do as we go through this process, it is going to come up and ask me for my profile information and then swipe to confirm. So each time you do this, you do need to swipe to consent to basically confirm that I'm going to use my identity to go ahead and log in and administer this ABT node. So when you get into the ABT node, there's a few things to note here. And again, if this is the first time you've seen this, this is the ABT Node Dashboard. So the ABT Node Dashboard will have some basic information that you would typically find on like a cloud server. And it's going to tell you what's running on the node, how much storage I have in terms of the cache, the core storage. One important thing I always like to point out to people, again, is you have this owner DID and node DID. So the owner DID, of course, is my decentralized identity. So I am actually the owner of this node. So one thing that's very different compared to a traditional server or a traditional node as you deploy it is in this case, we're actually using decentralized identity to effectively log in and secure the node. So even in the event of a username password breach underneath with the OS layer, this node is actually encrypted using your own decentralized identity to protect it. And the node itself actually has its own identity. So when I mentioned earlier about interoperability, services and support, this node actually generates its own DID. So it's able to operate and exist within the larger network and be able to move into different applications, services, networks, and again, anything that's built on the ArcBlock framework as you do that. And I had mentioned before, again, this is your action bar on the left-hand side. Typically, the first place we're going to go to install anything is our Blocklet page. So with the Blocklet page, for the demo purposes here, we have a pretty limited version just because we want to keep it nice and clean for you in terms of being able to view the different services here. But you can see, for example, we've got QLDB Manager for backend. We've got a game here called Crypto 2048. We do have an ABT node launcher. So if you're looking to run multiple nodes on top of AWS, you can actually use this service to quickly spin up and launch more ABT nodes on AWS. And then, of course, we have our DID Connect Blocklet. So the DID Connect Blocklet, and you can see this with any of these here, you're going to have if you haven't installed it yet, it's going to come up and offer to install the latest. And the other thing I would always kind of point out to people is you do have the ability to roll it back. So if you're building an application or a service and you do need to roll it back to a previous version, the Blocklets always have that ability to be able to roll back or upgrade to the next version as you do that. And then you do have an additional option here for open, and then also more. And you can see here again, in terms of the different versions, I have the ability to kind of swap in and out in terms of what I'm wanting to leverage for my application and service. So for our example, let's go ahead and click on open as we do this. So this is going to take you into the Blocklet kind of information page or starter page, if you will. And what you're always going to see typically with most Blocklets today, is you have an overview section, disk info, runtime info, and configuration in terms of that. I had mentioned earlier on in this process that there is one prerequisite required for DID Connect. We do have to attach some type of data store to the back end. So in our example, we are going to go and use MongoDB. And in this instance, you can see here, I've actually gone ahead and configured the MongoDB already with this blocklet to be able to support DID Connect. Just the two keys are, of course, is Mongo_URI, and then you're going to enter the value. And in my case, I set it up with DID Connect service. And on this configuration page, you're going to see different ports, different key information that your developers would need, URLs, and other things that might be required for your own application as you do this. So let's go ahead and head back over to the overview page. And again, with any blocklet, none of the blocklets are started by default. So again, one of the differences you might find with like an iPhone app, where once I install it, I can use it. So when we install this application on top of the ABT node, we do need to go ahead and start it. So as we extend the functionality of the node and we want to add this new service, we're going to go ahead and start it to run it. And as you can see here, we've already installed it. It's going to fire up. And you can see again here that it started at basically the time I'm running right now. And again, I'd mentioned earlier, similar to the node, this blocklet actually has its own DID, has its own decentralized identity. So it can exist within the larger ecosystem of applications, services, but also works with any users that you're generating in your system. And one thing to just point out here is, in terms of the status, of course, it is up and running. So I think let's go ahead and fire it up here. And we're going to click on the public interface. So as we go to the public interface, similar to the ABT node, we do use our decentralized identity to log in. So depending on the application and depending on the service, you may need to log into that service, again, using your wallet, or in this case, we can go ahead and log in because I had done it just a short time ago. So when I log into DID Connect, as I mentioned, it's very simple. It's meant to be something that anybody can effectively come in and start. And we look at this. I have a couple of examples here just so you can actually see what my applications look like. And these are identity apps. So in this case, I have a test demo. We have a login component, and then one I created for the DevCon 2020. For the purpose of this demo, let's actually go ahead and create a new application. So we're going to create our own identity app. And this one I'm going to call DevCon 2020 number 1. And let's go ahead and give it a description. And in this case, and you can provide an application web link if you currently have an application, or if this is something brand new, you can just go ahead and skip by it. And again, similar to the login component, as we create these things, we do need to attach it to our identity. So I'm going to go ahead and scan, and then it's going to come up and basically verify that I want to confirm. I say yes. And now this identity app has actually been created. So again, similar to the Blocklet process, it's not started by default. This is something you have to go in and do a little bit of configuration on, and then enable it in order for it to start to work. So in this case, let's go ahead and start it. And you can see here it's confirmed, this is successfully enabled. And now we're going to go into a little bit of configuration. So similar to like a login process that you would find today, you typically are going to see some type of user message that shows up. So again, we want to account for that and give users a really great experience in terms of how they come in, they log in, and what information is going to be required of them in order to do that. So in this case, we can go ahead and give them a nice login message. Welcome, we're glad you are here. And then there's a few requirements in terms of the attributes. This is the required information you actually need in terms of if you have specific requirements for your own application, you can require a full name, an email address, a phone number. And these are little bits of information that you can ask from the end user to provide when they're coming into your service for the first time. We can go ahead and save changes. And again, similar to before, we're going to scan. And similar to before, you can see it's very quick. And I'm going to go ahead and sign that transaction. And now we've gone ahead and enabled that. So there's one last step here in terms of getting the Blocklet up and running. And we need to go ahead and now enable the login service. So we've created the Blocklet. We've created our login settings. We gave a message, the required information that we need in order to use the service. So now let's go ahead and then enable that service. And it's going to come up and confirm that. All right. We are up and running. So as a last step, and I think just a way to kind of check your work, there is a live test feature on here. So If you want to go ahead and confirm that, in fact, this login component is actually working, we can actually run a live test. You click on that, and you'll see I'm signed in as Rob Roy Hobbs, which is my login. All right, great work, everybody. So as you can see, that process is very simple. It doesn't require a rocket science degree, and really, I don't even need to be a developer or an engineer to go through that process. However, the next step would be is if you want to go ahead and go further with this, there is an integration option where we begin to look at how we want to build it into our application or how we want to begin to build it into our service. So here you can actually see several examples. So if I want to integrate this login component into my React.js application or my Android app, you can actually go in and look. There's example projects. So this gives you a quick example of a DID Connect React app that we can actually set up. And this is something anybody can do. So if we go back here, we can also look at, again, we have Android apps, Express.js. One of the ones we've actually used for ourselves is we've actually built a community site using Discourse. And in Discourse, we're actually using OAuth 2 for the login component. So I can actually show that to you here really quickly. And again, I think I mentioned before, this is something we fully embrace this all the way around. We want to work to make sure that not only are we talking about the services, but we use these services as well for ourselves. So up here, you can see this is the ArcBlock community site. There's activity on here, and there's a login component. And I'd mentioned before, this is actually using OAuth 2. So this is not a standard decentralized identity login. This is actually OAuth 2 connected to decentralized identity. So let's go ahead and just log in. And this again is using DID Connect to make this actually work. So we're going to go ahead and log in. You can see from my wallet, it's updating a little bit of information, asking for my profile. I'm going to swipe to confirm the consent that I want to go ahead and log in and share that information. And I'm authorized and authenticated through OAuth 2, and I am now logged into the website. Going to go ahead and ask me for basic information. All right, we'll come back to that later on. You can see the example there. So as far as a couple of other quick notes of information, as you create this identity service, of course, one of the things that you're going to want to know about is users and logs. So you always have that ability to go in and review the users who are coming into your system and see the logs of the people that are accessing the website or accessing the application. And again, that's one of the benefits of this type of service. And if you want to connect it to a blockchain, you have that kind of full, transparent, secure mode of being able to look at that information with the immutable data. So that's it for DID Connect. We think it's a great experience. We're really excited for developers, app builders, businesses to begin to leverage this technology, leverage this Blocklet service on top of ABT Node for their own applications and services. I would encourage everybody install ABT Node, install the DID Connect service, and begin to run your own decentralized identity service without requiring anybody else. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a great afternoon at DEF CON 2020.